In this section, I'm going to introduce you to functional programming.
Functional programming is a programming paradigm or a way to approach programming problems.
Specific programming languages have been written to take advantage of this paradigm. Just like C++ and Java were written to take advantage of an OOP paradigm, other languages like Haskell were written to take advantage of a functional programming paradigm. JavaScript is a multi-use language. It can use the OOP paradigm. It can also use the functional approach. JavaScript is built to do either and more.
Now, you've probably been doing fine with your own coding practices. Maybe you use an OOP paradigm and that's been working fine. So why learn functional programming?
Well, for this reason. A person that only knows one way to do a thing is at a greater disadvantage than a person that knows multiple ways to accomplish the same thing. Now, some might argue that if a person focuses on a single technique in coding, they become an expert at it. Now, that's true, but when we apply it to this situation, it assumes that learning functional programming concepts will take away from the other concepts already learned. I don't believe that. It will add to what you already know. I've never been big on restricting myself coding-wise. Remember, with JavaScript, you can use functional programming techniques in code that follows an OOP paradigm, and you can use objects in code that follow a functional paradigm. That is the best argument for learning both. So, with that theoretical discussion out of the way, let's take a look at what functional programming is. Now, defining functional programming as a program built from function is only providing 10% of the picture. That is a very simple definition. But the problem with most definitions of functional programming is that they don't really clear things up because they're not easy to understand. You have to learn functional programming, it seems, to understand the definition. Let's take a look at one of these definitions. This was provided by Eric Elliott in his blog. And he defines functional programming this way. Functional programming is the process of building software by composing pure functions, avoiding shared state, mutable data, and side effects. Functional programming is declarative rather than imperative, and application state flows through pure functions. Now, the problem with this definition is it defines functional programming assuming you already know the concepts that make up functional programming. However, we can use this definition. Let's pull apart the definition. Let's look at the individual parts, and this will help us understand functional programming. So this definition really identifies the approaches made in functional programming. Let's look at what some of those approaches are. Functional programming avoids side effects. Functional programming avoids mutations. Functional programming avoids shared state. Those are things we try to avoid with functional programming. Now, here are some things we try to achieve. Functional programming uses pure functions. Functional programming uses function composition, and functional programming uses declarative code instead of imperative code. Now, I've broken these out, but you still may not understand what some of those terms mean, what declarative code is as opposed to imperative code, what shared state is. You may still not understand some of those terms, and I understand that. So in the next several movies, we will go through each of these to make sure they are understood. And we will look at principles and techniques used in functional programming. It's the principles and techniques you will end up applying to your own code. But you need to understand the approach for a couple reasons. First, it will help you understand the principles and techniques. And second, as an advanced JavaScript programmer, you want to be conversant in multiple approaches. Now, if you go on and decide to use a functional paradigm for all your coding projects, that's fantastic. But remember, JavaScript was not written just for a functional approach, just like it wasn't written just for an object-oriented approach. At times, you will need or should take shortcuts when using JavaScript with a functional approach. And that's okay. You need to be okay with that. Because JavaScript was not written solely to take advantage of a functional approach, there are certain things that functional programming languages have that JavaScript does not have or does not do very well. So in those cases, I believe, and many others that work in functional programming have stated, that it's okay to take shortcuts. All right, let's take a look at these approaches that are espoused by functional programming in JavaScript.